Hello, families, and welcome back to our Family U Chats webinar series. I'm super excited for you to be here today. Today, we are talking about disability services. And so this is a part of our Family U Chats webinar series where we invite campus partners to talk to you about really important things. This is part of our series, and as you know, our whole series is recorded, and so you can go back and watch it on our Facebook, on our YouTube, and on our website. You have lots of options to rewatch it and share it with your students, and so make sure that you reference this information when you need it. Again, my name is Jonathan Sunwar. I serve as the Associate Dean for Parent and Family Services, and so super excited to continue engaging with you all. And today I'm joined by Anne Marie Thorpe, who is going to talk to you about disability services, and she's the Director of Disability Services. So thank you so much for being here and for presenting to our families.
Thank you so much for having me, Jonathan. Delighted to do this and so happy to have an opportunity to work with our families. Our families of students with disabilities are unique. Their needs are unique, as are, of course, our students. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we operate, what we can and can't do, and hopefully we'll have a great conversation about trying to assist your students in transitioning to college, and hopefully answer some burning questions. I'm delighted to have this opportunity because the one thing that I think most folks don't know is that the transition to college for students with disabilities is a complete 180 turn from the way that sort of societally we deal with disability in K-12. So there is a little bit of extra preparation that has to happen, both like within families as well as, for the individual student, to try to make that transition as smooth as possible. But I love the opportunity to be forthcoming about it. So I've got some learning objectives here. Basically, I'm going to talk about, what is a disability in the ADA, considered by the ADA? What are the processes for determining eligibility when students register with our office? What we're going to focus on the key differences between K-12 and college, because I think that's kind of the missing information that most folks don't have. Talk a little bit about distinguishing between what's, reasonable and unreasonable, and talk about how you anticipate transitioning your students and how we'll also be working with them through the transition. So disability is essentially defined in the law as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. That became law in 1990, but in 2008, there was a review of it where the ADA was expanded into the Amendments Act. And that's primarily the majority of the accommodations and needs of students that we deal with. So students, of course, I think on the floor, we're looking at compliance. We want our students to be able to attend all events, to be able to, live in accessible environments, to work in accessible environments. But still kind of blows my mind a little bit that prior to 2008, we really only considered major life activities as like moving or walking or seeing. But in 2008, that also included reading and concentrating and thinking and communicating. So Lord knows what we were doing before 2008, but very happy to see this. The timeline for students and the process for students is as such. Students interested in receiving services through our office would complete an online registration form and upload any documentation they would have based specifically on their disability. So, for instance, a student who was hard of hearing would turn in an audiogram, whereas a student who is neurodiverse or maybe on the autism spectrum might send in a copy of their neuropsychological report. You can submit those right through our Clockwork website. Students, once they are enrolled at UMass, will be given a student login, and that's all that they use to access those materials, which are on our website, which is umass.edu/disability. Oh my goodness, this is upside down. So let me make that a little bit more accessible and turn it right side up. All right. So after students submit that information, they'll receive a confirmation from us that we've received it, and it will either ask for additional information if that's needed at the time, or more likely, we will ask the student to book an appointment with an access coordinator. Post-COVID, we have automated a lot of these tools, so students can sign up for an appointment online 24/7, and we have a schedule open so that they can select an access coordinator that works with their schedule. At that point, the student will meet with an access coordinator. That appointment can be in person in our office, it can be remote, it can be by phone, and that is the beginning of what we call the iterative process. Typically at that first meeting, students are going to be asked a little bit about what we've read in the documentation they've provided. We're going to ask them, about themselves, what do they know about themselves and what works, and where they might struggle, where they shine. Because all of that information helps us build a better relationship with the student and allows us to advocate on their behalf in the most appropriate way. An IEP, a 504 testing is just a snapshot, and we're working with a dynamic individual. So we want to make sure that we're addressing both their academic needs and their student and campus life needs. From there, following that appointment, the access coordinator will follow up with any of our various offices and programs that might need to be notified of an accommodation need. So for instance, students who need accommodations in the residence halls, if they need accommodations in regards to dining services, the access coordinator will coordinate those pieces. And then the student also has a responsibility to log into Clockwork and send out their accommodation forms. So that's a pretty easy process, but the access coordinators actually go through during their meeting. And that is how faculty are informed of what those needs are. It all comes through a database. It's just kind of punching a bunch of buttons. It's not super complicated. But what's important is that we are dynamic human beings and in a lot of new situations. So the student will follow up with their access coordinator to build a relationship, to have a contact person on campus that they can connect with, and also the iterative process continues. So if the student realizes, I didn't think I would need this, but I'm realizing I need it now, they can always, follow up with their access coordinator, have a conversation, and see if that's reasonable and what's possible. Also, our program staff, which I'll get to next, provides a lot of additional supports. Not only does our office meet with students to address their accommodation needs, but we also provide a fair amount of accommodation programs for the university. So the program staff will also talk to students about specific information that they may need. So moving forward, this is our staff. We're kind of, I think like everybody at the university, moving to fill some vacancies post-COVID, but we do have an associate director who oversees all of our access coordinators. Our access coordinators are the staff members that your student will meet with to help define what their accommodations are and are their primary source of contact within our office. In addition, we also have some assistant directors who run programs that we offer for the university, which include communication access for students who are deaf and hard of hearing. We coordinate the interpreters, captionists, vendors, equipment loan. We also have an extensive exam proctoring program. We provide note-taking or classroom access to students who are eligible. Some students with print disabilities will require their documents to be converted, and we assist with that process. And we also have a learning specialist program for students who are eligible to get some additional supports around executive functioning skills, organization development, and sometimes like some social skill assistance. So we're a pretty big group, but we have a pretty big population, and I'm really delighted to see where the university is going with its accessibility goals. The thing that is missing is this information. We are actually working with our local high schools to try to make sure that this information comes out a little bit earlier, because I think it is more helpful for the process if folks are aware before they are ready to come to college. But it's that in high school, education is a right and it must be accessible, whereas coming to a university or college is not a right. It's people go through an assessment process, they're admitted, they meet certain criteria. And so as a different level of commitment, it's also the Individuals with Disabilities Act entitles or guarantees students with disabilities accommodations and services, whereas in the college and university, the laws obviously are to make sure that things are accessible, but that is based more programmatically. So what you might find is that your student might be interested in joining a RAP or a TAP program, for instance, and in those cases, the location for that might not be an accessible environment. We will work with that program to make it accessible. We'll still offer it. It just might not be in the same space that it was the year prior. And that can be for many reasons. At the college and university level, our role is to maintain access, to reduce barriers. Whereas in K-12, they can make fundamental modifications to curriculum, change programs, and the goal is the success of the student and the least restrictive environment. At the university, we provide opportunities for success, but we can't mandate success. And so we also can't change the requirements. The rigor for students with disabilities is the same as it is for all students. We just might put some accommodations in place to make it accessible and level the playing field a bit. And the other piece for this slide is that in K-12, personal care attendance assessments for disability are provided and funded by the school. In college and university settings, there are some opportunities on campus where they can do some testing, but the onus is on the student to pay for that testing. So I always encourage folks who are still enrolled in high school to get the most updated testing they can while the school system is responsible for it, because those tests can be quite expensive. And we know that that in itself can be a financial barrier for students. I think the key difference is that in high school, everyone kind of knows your business. The special ed teacher, the IEP team, parents, teachers, administrators, the student, they all have an opportunity to be engaged and involved and have access to information about the student's disability and what their accommodations are. In the college and university setting, this is the key difference. The process is completely student defined. We at Disability Services will not know that your son or daughter or your student is here unless they register with us. So even if they wrote an incredible essay about the experience of disability, that information is confidentially destroyed by admissions, and they don't reach out to us to inform us that a particular student has a disability, because one, we know a lot of folks don't disclose during the process, and two, we are a decentralized system and the law requires us to keep strict confidentiality. So in college, our office, or similar offices at other campuses will advocate on behalf of the students' accommodation need, but we will not be disclosing the disability to faculty members, students' office, financial aid, because that piece is irrelevant. What people need to know is what needs to be done, as opposed to personal details. Also, parents are heavily involved in the high school arena. I'm sure you all know, because as a parent of a student with a disability myself, I know that we have often had to fight for our students to get the resources that they need. And so we've been heavily involved in that process. When it comes to college, we can take in information from you, but we are not at liberty to share that information because the student is responsible for getting their needs met. So we wouldn't report out to parents like, yes, we met with Susan this week. This is what we covered. That's information we will cover with the student. And also we find that the team in high school periodically meets with teachers and parents to discuss their educational progress. That's something that you will have to work out with your student around, what are our expectations as a family that you communicate with us. So that's one of the first things I'll put out there, is that having a conversation with your student before they come or as they get here about what your expectations are of them is pretty essential. Also, if you're used to talking to parents, if you're used to talking to teachers, you're also going to find in the higher ed environment, it's not really appropriate to be reaching out to faculty members, and they're likely not going to return your responses because their role is to treat your student as an adult. The other pieces are logistical. So, for instance, one thing that I think we're all noticing is that we've moved from an environment where, maybe we used a couple of tools on our computer to now we live in an environment where there's a different platform or application for everything we do. And that can feel like a bit of a logistical challenge for students. One, because it's new, and two, because if you have memory deficits or you have to keep track of, for this class, I use Moodle. For this class, I use Canvas. To check my academic record, I use Spire. To work with disability services and my accommodations, I use Clockwork. So just a bit of a change from the typical high school experience, but also when students come to college, if they are living in our residence halls, in addition to getting used to living independently, the increased academic rigor and logistical rigor of living in a new place and being in new courses, they're also getting used to, hey, I used to see my teacher every day, so I'm used to having a relationship like that in my class of 25 to 30 students, whereas I could be in some classes that are several hundred students. So how do I prepare myself for utilizing office hours as opposed to, I'm just gonna check in with my teacher after class? In high school, teachers typically, prompt students to get their work done, give them reminders. Hey, this is coming up. Professors at the university level are going to provide a syllabus and expect students to follow it and to be responsible for the information that they update on their class site. So it's a shift. And in high school, sometimes if you're just a good memorizer, you don't really need to learn these information. Whereas in the college and university setting, you're being asked to look at things critically, to be able to not only read the information, but create some meaningful critical critique. And so those might be newer skills for your student. Also, I would just say, load wise, we consider moving one of the most stressful experiences a person may have, right up there with loss. There's so many beautiful things about coming to college, and it's a super positive experience, but it is also hard. It is also, maybe grieving friends that went to a different school. It's having more work to do. It's getting used to living with someone you've not lived with before. So there is a bit more of a kind of mental load there. The last few things I'll focus on about this are that students often are not clear what an office hour is, particularly our first gen students. I'll tell you, I was a first gen student. I thought office hours were where you went there if you were like in trouble. And I still find that some students are like, office hours. But the reality is we want all of our students to build relationships with their faculty. Not only are faculty more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt if they know you, but also you're going to be connected to more opportunities, internships. You're going to need to build relationships with faculty to get recommendations for if you go on to graduate school. So we really want to encourage that early on. And that can feel very different than their previous experience with teachers. Most classes have fewer test or graded opportunities. So if you've not done well in a high school class, typically there's more opportunities for you to do better. But if you are taking a class where there's 3 tests, those tests are going to be weighed differently. And also we're a big campus. So that's fantastic. I think we have a beautiful campus, and that's wonderful, but it's also, I was just walking around campus with my 14-year-old the other day, and her mind was blown. She's like, oh my goodness, you have to go this far in 15 minutes. And that didn't dawn on me as strange, but to her, it reminded me, oh, wow, this is something that people need to consider, particularly for folks who are neurodivergent, might have some time blindness of, oh, I really got a motor between this location and that location. So these are all just changes, but change can be hard. And so we want folks to consider these things as they go into their experience. And perhaps maybe that first semester, maybe take a little bit of a lighter load to transition, knowing that there are opportunities to, take those credits when you've kind of mastered living somewhere new. One thing that's important to point out is that we cannot fundamentally alter any course. So for instance, in college, we can't lower the academic standards. Like I said earlier, the rigor is the same. We can put some accommodations in place, like providing a note taker or giving a student extended time on assignments or exams, but we can't require the faculty member to change the course because that would be considered a fundamental alteration. So now we get a lot of questions of, well, if this course is something that's needed, maybe I'll just take it remotely because I had an injury and I'm going to be out for surgery. Not all classes can be made remote, particularly within the context of the semester. So that's something that on the surface might seem easy, but in reality, it's a little different. We also, and this is the end of what feels like a little bit of a negative statement, is that we can't ensure that all students are going to be successful. We certainly want all of our students to be successful, and we want to help reduce any barriers. But the point is to give students the opportunity to determine their level of success. We take care of the access piece, they work on the success piece. So early preparation helps everyone. It helps the student feel more confident coming to campus. It helps you as parents feel a little bit like, whew, I've been probably doing a lot of things to support this young person my whole life, and that feels like quite a transition to not be there to continue to do those things. Um, so it's a big change, and the earlier we can help prepare people for the differences, I think the better that they will do. So some things that I would ask parents to consider is, how are you accommodating your student? Because when you're not in their dorm room or in their class with them or seeing them every day, you're not going to have really the opportunity to do those things. And also, typically it's time for them to figure out a way to accommodate themselves. And what I mean by that is, it's not uncommon for me to hear that students have had parents that have woken them up every morning or made sure they got on the bus. There's not going to be someone here to wake them up and ensure that they go to class. That is part of the freedom of college. So that they need to learn ways to make sure they get themselves up and get themselves to class and deal with, the negative and positive repercussions that come from that. How are you working with them to empower them to build in those accommodations? So, hey, I know I'm not always great about, taking my medication on time. Okay, how can we brainstorm how you'll do that? I'm not going to be there to remind you to take your medication, but you've got a cell phone or a watch. Can we set some reminders so that an alarm goes off every day to remind you to take your medication? Simple things, but as a mom myself, totally guilty of doing those things, and the 9 million reminders to make it happen. But the reality is, now is really the time to get them to do that themselves. How do we support and build their self-advocacy skills? So, as our students grow up, we want to encourage them to not rely on us for things that they can do, like scheduling their doctor's appointments and other things that have to transition in time. Oh, whoops, sorry about that. Have to transition in time as they're growing up. And what is your communication plan? It sounds kind of weird to call it that, but every family has their own, kind of vibe. So do you expect to talk to your student every day? Do you expect to talk to them once a week? I hear a lot of students who maybe don't respond to their text messages. So putting together and having that conversation around, hey, what are you doing for yourself? How can I be supportive of you? Please be honest with me if you've not done well. I'd rather know that so that we can help problem solve how you can study better or differently or use other resources before it's the end of the semester and you're afraid you're going to fail. I see a lot of students who get really nervous about not doing well, and the reality is sometimes we're going to do better than other times. It's always helpful if we know earlier on so that we can help them problem solve and look for resources. But it's going to be imperative that they're able to tell you, I'm struggling here, without a negative outcome, because then they will stop talking to you. And that is typically where we see students, kind of struggling in silence. They don't always realize that, failing a test or failing a class, while no one wants to see that happen, is something that is repairable. The student can retake the class, they can get a better grade, they can improve their GPA. But in the moment, these are young folks whose frontal lobes are still growing. And so it can feel, if they're not in a great space, like it's the end of the world. So part of the communication plan should be, please, communicate with us early and often. I put in this quote from Mr. Rogers because it says, often when you think you're at the end of something, you're at the beginning of something else. I included that because this is really a powerful time for a lot of people's lives. Not only is this like a great transition for your student, but it's also a transition for you as a parent. It's a transition for your family. Even parents I've met who are like, "Ooh, can't wait to ship this kid out. I want to turn that room into a gym." Still are typically surprised by the emotions that are evoked by this transition. And I want you all to know that we at Disability Services work with our students, I would say, like, in a more intimate and vulnerable way than they do with a lot of other offices. So we recognize that this is a process for all parties and that there are going to be some hard days just because it's a change. And so we are prepared for that. Pretty common accommodations that occur within our office are academic accommodations, our exam proctoring center for students who need distraction-reduced settings, other tools like a reader or scribe. They need extended time. So for instance, we encourage students to reach out to their faculty to see if they already have arrangements for those things. And if they don't, they book their exams with us. Easy peasy, they do it online. The expectation is that they do it with 5 business days notice. But typically most syllabi will have the dates and times of scheduled exams that students get at the beginning of the semester. The student can sign up for all of their exams as soon as they find out about it. And we encourage them to do that so it's not a deadline they have to consider when they're busier. The other piece is our final exams. The deadline for that to sign up for finals is November 20th. So if your student is in need of those accommodations, we encourage them to set those up and by that date. And the reason that we can't do them later is because we actually proctor about 6,400 exams a year, and that includes about 1,200 that occur during final exams alone. So what I can assure you is that if the students have signed up on time and informed us of an exam, what they will get is a reminder email that tells them that their exam has been booked and the date, time, and location in which they will take it, which is typically overlapping when the class takes it most of the time. If students need accessible materials, we can convert their documents. We can connect them with the assistive technology lab. And of course, inform their faculty members that their information needs to be made in an accessible format. We also sometimes move classes to accessible locations and also can provide classroom furniture if that's appropriate. I will add that we also do classroom furniture for students who don't have disabilities, but we recognize that, some classes still have those godforsaken all-in-one desk chair situations. And if a student is uncomfortable or feeling ashamed, they're not going to be in the best place for learning. And so as a bigger person myself, I never want a student to be in that boat. We will gladly ask for them to just register with us so that they're in our database. But instead of providing documentation, they can just say, I'm a bigger person. I need a separate desk and chair, or, I'm 6'5". I need something different that's going to work for me. And we'll take care of that. We also, of course, work with our ASL interpreters, captioning. We do some equipment loan. We have a robust note-taking program, which consists of Glean, which is an AI transcription service. You can check that out at glean.co if you wanted to check that out. And there's also in some classes where Glean's not an appropriate accommodation, we do have student volunteer note takers that earn academic credit or community service hours for providing note taking. For classes, for students who have physical access needs, we have classroom access assistants that are assigned to work with students, say a student who has limited strength in their arms, that classroom access assistant might serve as a scribe, or they might mix chemicals in a lab at the direction of the student. And we also refer students to the accessible van service program that we have on campus to help students manage transportation between academic and spaces. So, and of course, we handle tons of accommodations in regards to food allergies, residential life needs, whether that's early move-in or a single room. And we work with facilities very closely to help monitor everything from snow pileup on curb cuts to just reporting areas where, because we live in New England, sometimes we get like potholes and stuff that can affect students' access needs. So I'm going to stop running my mouth at y'all and say thank you. And I am here for questions.
Okay, great. Well, families, please use the Q&A feature to ask Anne Marie any questions that you may have. Anne Marie, while you were talking, there was a question that came in.
Sure.
So I'm just going to kind of read it to you. One, they said, thank you, super helpful, all that you're talking about. They said that on the advice of disability services, their student took 12 credit hours their first semester.
Mhm.
But now when they're registering for classes, they are at the lower end of students with credits. And so they are one of the last to register. Does your office ever approve an adjusted registration date to at least allow the students have an earlier registration date within their class?
We do have that as an accommodation for some, but not all students. I can explain that typically we provide early registration for students that have accommodations that are difficult or that take time to put into place. So for instance, like hiring an interpreter, if we have to convert the documents, or perhaps if the student has a physical access need where we'll need to hire a classroom access assistant, or perhaps move a class from an inaccessible to an accessible environment. Those are all reasons why we would approve somebody for early registration. It's not something we can do for all of our students. That's a situation that's going to get better every semester. And we encourage anyone who takes the 12 takes credits that they need to like catch up on to work with their academic advisor to help them make the best choices moving forward, because you want to, you know, based on what your needs and skills are, you want to also make sure that you have a pretty well-rounded academic plan. You know, you don't want a semester where it's like all tests, or a semester where it's all papers if you can avoid it. We also encourage students to use winter session and summer session to maybe make up some of those credits. And I always encourage students who feel like they need to really, if there's a course that they're really dreading or, you know, are concerned about, it's never a bad idea to either take those during winter or summer session, where you can focus solely on that, or consider taking a class at even a community college or another institution, maybe closer to home. You can always run the course description by the registrar's office, and they will let you know in advance if that will satisfy a requirement here before you spend the money and take the class. So food for thought.
All right, so our next question for you says, is it too late for a first-year student to get help with this semester?
Not at all. What I would say, the little caveat there, is that we can't do any retroactive accommodations. We can't say to the faculty member like, oh, you know, grade this differently, or let them take exams they already took. But if they register with us and get their accommodations sent out, those accommodations will be can be used moving forward. So get on in here. That'd be great.
All right, so a question that I have is what is the most common issue or accommodation that you all make, and how do you all kind of serve that typical student?
Totally. I would say our largest population of students with disabilities are psychological disabilities. So I don't think it's any surprise to folks that that we're hearing that we're kind of a mental health generation. We've got a lot of folks who've come forward with mental health challenges, particularly during and post-COVID. So a lot of our students register with us because of those needs, or have multiple needs. Like, so you might have some executive functioning challenges and be struggling with depression. A student who has ADHD and a student who has anxiety and depression, they look a lot alike when it comes to what they need. Those things are often confused for one another. So I think we're seeing a lot of that. And the accommodation piece around that can be really challenging. And the reason for that is that we have a pretty time strict semester to work with, and we know that in real life, right, if you're feeling depressed, like, kind of starts out with like, oh, I'm not going to go to class today, I'm not feeling great, and then maybe you miss a second class, and then by the time it's the third class, you're feeling too anxious to go because you missed class and you're behind. And so even if right at that point you sought out care, it's going to take a little time for you to get an appointment. It's going to take a little time for someone to put together that you might be depressed, and then you get that documentation and you register with us, say it's halfway through the semester. Like, so time is always kind of our biggest challenge there. We will always do whatever we can to help students kind of right the ship. But the biggest challenge with a psychological disability is that it's not like a broken leg or a concussion. It's not like it happens, you identify it, immediate care occurs, and then you immediately get assistance. Those things take a little while to sort of come to fruition, which is also something we see with folks who have sort of complex medical needs. You think you have a stomach ache, then by the time you see a specialist and you realize you have Crohn's disease, you've typically missed a fair amount of class and you're dealing with a crisis. So it doesn't, what I want to pivot to is that it's always good to keep us informed. And in the short term, it could sometimes result in incompletes or things that don't feel great initially, but also help us help the student in the long term. Oh, you're muted, huh?
So we have a couple more questions coming in.
Yeah.
So the first question says, my first semester student registered for services and accommodations before the semester started.
Yeah.
Some of the professors didn't offer accommodations, and she's kind of frustrated with how to handle that situation. So what advice do you have for when that happens?
Totally. I would encourage you to reach out to your student's access coordinator. Particularly, I would encourage you to have your student communicate with your access coordinator with what's happening, because the challenge of being in this environment is that because we're not all connected, we won't know where the challenge is until we're informed. So if your student hasn't informed us that their faculty member is being unhelpful. We won't,
Challenging, yeah.
yeah, we won't know to step in. A lot of times, faculty who don't put accommodations in place are not coming from a place of malintent. It's that they either thought it was already accessible, or they just don't quite understand. And so typically all it takes is a conversation with one of our access coordinators and the faculty member to explain why that's needed and what's appropriate. I think that one of the things we're working on as an office is trying to provide more rubrics for faculty to take into consideration, because we don't want people disclosing left and right. It's your personal information. We also know sometimes, even with the best intent, folks, make judgments. But if we can provide faculty a rubric of, hey, in this situation, we're advocating for a student who might have more absences than your average student. That doesn't mean the student has a free pass for, absences, but what it means is that we're gonna encourage them to keep you posted. And then if it gets to a point where the absences are impacting the student, and that's different from course to course, depending on how they're structured, that a conversation happens before the student's surprised that they are not doing well.
Mhm.
But anyway, make a long story short, inform the access coordinator and we can help.
And they have a question about the term access coordinator. Is that the same as like the case manager, kind of what
Yep.
but yeah. Unless they're working with somebody in the dean of students office, then we also have case managers, but typically if they're in disability services, they're talking about their access coordinator.
Absolutely.
So the next question says, what documentation do you need if my student has a mental health disability and has been under professional care already, but is not registered with your office, but now needs accommodations?
Okay, that's a great question. For that situation, a letter on letterhead from a licensed medical provider, particularly, psychiatrist, psychologist, licensed social worker, those would be ideal. Students coming from a K-12 environment, with any sort of like learning disabilities, or I would say even like neurodiversity needs around executive functioning or dyslexia or what have you, a letter, a copy of the neuropsych eval is always best. We will take an IEP or a 504 plan as documentation, but it doesn't provide us a lot of information to go on. So always the testing that's been done provides us the most information. If you think about it, it's sort of like we're coming up with an IEP for college. Like we're taking into consideration the contextual aspects, whereas an IEP is like, how is the student's disability impacting their high school career? We're looking at how is it impacting their college career.
Well, you talked about students who are neurodiverse, and so this question also kind of is about that, is that there's a student who is on the spectrum, and they're now in their third semester in the honors college. And they did very well in their first semester and then didn't do as well in their second semester. And that's when they kind of contacted your office. And now they're struggling in their third semester, and the family believes it's about their depression.
Okay.
The student kind of spends a lot of time alone, hasn't made too many friends. Is there support for the social sides of this kind of isolation and depression that the student's experiencing?
Yes. I would say that most of these efforts are in conjunction with other offices, because we're doing an awful lot here at the university around connecting students and making sure that there's a sense of belonging here. So I would say specific to the ASD, we do have an ASD support group that meets on Wednesdays in Wilder Hall. And I can send out information to the group with the time, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But they meet regularly on Wednesdays. It's a pretty cool group of folks who are really getting a lot of support, not only from CCPH, which is our Center for Counseling and Psychological Health, but also there's a member of our staff there, and they're a pretty robust group. So a lot of folks have been meeting one another, which is great because we all need to have folks we have things in common with. But I would also encourage them to look out for opportunities related to our Okanagan Charter, which is where our focus on belonging comes from, and campus events that are open widely. I think a common misconception we have is that we know it can be more challenging for neurodiverse students to, kind of feel like they fit in or deal with kind of the rejection concern, like the rejection sensitive dysphoria that comes with that. I speak as a neurodiverse person myself, but I would encourage you to consider the fact that if there's a crisis that's happening in higher ed, it is a crisis of connection. We've got students who are, coming from this major life transition and feeling alone in that process. It's certainly easier, don't get me wrong, for students who are socially motivated and are well connected. But I would say that UMass becomes a smaller place the more you put yourself in it. Sometimes it can feel real small after that. But I would encourage your student to not only consider going to the ASD group, but also, figuring out what their interests are and joining a club and knowing that they are far from the only person in there who kind of struggled to go in the door. It's something we're seeing kind of, I would say at this point, generationally as well. So maybe even just reminding them that they are not alone in that kind of discomfort. But definitely check out the ASD group. And also CCPH has a ton of groups going on, around all aspects of sort of our social sphere here. So there are groups for students with medical disabilities to connect up. There are students who, are challenged by anxiety, but also we're just kind of at a unique space where we're trying to help students make some of the connections that came a little bit easier before we were sort of socially separated.
Yep. So I put the link to that group
Thank you.
in the chat while you were talking. And so it's today at 4:30 in Wilder Hall. So please encourage your student to go. And then here's the link to all of the group and workshops that CCPH offers.
Excellent.
The next question for you says, how does my student get a mental health evaluation on campus?
Oh, yes. Please contact the CCPH. All students are given a number of appointments that they have free as part of their health insurance. And then they also can do resource and referral into the community. They also have a triage program. So typically what happens is when the student connects with CCPH is they'll do a brief triage call with them to assess if the student has like an immediate need, or if this is a situation where they want to connect the person to the counselor that's going to be kind of the best fit for them. They also have some supplemental programs where students can communicate kind of like with the third party to assist with like kind of short-term help as well. But I'll be honest, those resources have grown considerably since I've been in the same unit with CCPH. So I would definitely encourage checking out their website for all of the opportunities there. But it is very easy to get to get connected, to get an assessment, and connect with resources on our campus.
Okay. So one more question from families, and it says, my student is a senior at UMass and has been told to consider medically withdrawing by their success advisor. The student's struggling with their mental health, and the family member has met with your office. So what would you suggest as next steps? Is there someone else this family can talk to? Kind of where should they go?
Yeah, I would say either connect with the access coordinator that your student's working with, or if there are concerns there, you can also reach out to Lauren Collier. Lauren is our associate director, and she supervises all of our access coordinator staff. So she could, help problem solve there in a way that might be more specific to the needs of your student. I know there's some confusion around the difference between taking a medical withdrawal versus a personal withdrawal, and the expectations around returning to campus and all that stuff. I don't want to go too far ahead into like the personal stuff, but definitely reach out to the access coordinator or Lauren. All of our staff and their emails are on our website under the tab. Oh my goodness, I look at it so often I can't even think of it. But there's something like about us, and we have a staff page with the pictures and names and contact information for each member of our staff.
Okay. There was one last question that came in. So, and
Sure.
I've heard it before, and so I'm going to ask this one.
Yes.
The student has some executive functioning challenges and
Mhm.
some stress, some other issues with stress. And so, does your office offer someone to sit with students while they register for courses, or kind of where can a student get registration help?
Okay. Students typically do their registration. Like advisors will have a specific set of information that's relevant to course selection for their major, which is something that we wouldn't necessarily have. So what I would recommend is have the student meet with the advisor, figure out what it is that the advisor is recommending that they take. Because some classes are only offered fall semester or spring semester, and you don't want to kind of mess up that sequence. But we don't typically have staff that meet with students to help them register, because that's typically what the advisor would do. But we certainly could have a student meet with their access coordinator, and we could help kind of walk them through that process. Additionally, I would say we have a learning specialist program. If the student is eligible for that, they do a variety of options. They have one-on-one opportunities. They also have just kind of a drop-in center, a couple hours a week, where students who just need kind of like a body double to stay motivated to do their studying, we can offer that. There's a learning specialist in the room if there's questions. But I think a lot of us learned during the pandemic, hey, I don't necessarily want to talk to you, but it's awful nice. I get more accomplished if I've got someone, this is me personally, if I've got someone in my house, I'm more likely to get the dishes done. And so we find that also with our students. Sometimes they don't want to necessarily talk to each other, but it helps to get studying done when they know that they're going to be in a place where they kind of have a little bit of an accountability buddy.
Well, if families only remember one thing that you said today, what is it that you want them to remember?
One thing I would say, err on the side of reaching out to us, having the student reach out to us if earlier than later. We never want someone who's in a health crisis to also have to be dealing with registering so we can be of service to them. We don't want, no one's ever going to require a student to take their accommodations. Students have lots of choices. Even if they had a ton of accommodations and didn't want to use any of them, that's an option, or they wanted to use some in this class and some in another. There's no real, everything is case by case in our office. So we would much rather have you have your student register with us so that we can be of service to them when they need assistance than to try to retrofit. Think of it this way. You have the option when you come to college to build your own experience, or you have the option to retrofit what you get. A retrofit is never as great as building it from the design you have in your mind. So worst thing's going to happen is students going to come to us and ask for something that we're going to say is we can't do or is not reasonable, but never been in a boat where we've said no to a student where we didn't also refer them to other resources that could be of assistance to them. So a no isn't necessarily a hard stop. It's a, hey, are you aware of the Learning Resource Center and all the tutoring that they offer? Hey, are you aware of this other great resource at the university, which you just might not know about yet?
Well, thank you so much for being here today and for talking with our families. Really appreciate everything you have to say. And families, thank you for being here and participating. As always, this recording will be available on YouTube, on our website, and on Facebook. And so we hope that you will access this recording as you need. And we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.